very much. Geothermal project, study and operation, the study with a lot of resources, financial resources. And based on this exercise, it is based on subsidies because it's quite risky and the operation could be open to more private finances, a solution implemented by the bank at the Caribbean level. So they are asking for more funds and grants, and this notion of mutualization between the different states and projects so we can rationalize everything. So we are really focused on this notion of mutualization. And as you said in your conclusion, geothermal energy takes time. So it's a whole notion and a new vision on the energy mix with including renewable energies. It's time now to have questions. Do we have any, if we have any questions online, it's time to have a look at them and also in the room if you want. Okay, one online question. Today, I think that Mr. Verdon, the question was before you today. Do you have a lot of private investors? Are there a lot of private investors nowadays about the geothermal energy projects? Mr. Verdon, the answer is yes. We have some operators, private operators of geothermal energy plants. For instance, when we did these funds to get rid of the risk on exploration, 30-ish private companies producing energy and heat were created in 5 years' time. So what I'm trying to say is that just as you can find wind resource on a specific site and you ask the private sector to finance it once it is proven, same thing for geothermal energy. When it is proven, you can attract private sector. Once you can prove that the project is really viable, it will be less expensive than a diesel central, so it's easier to attract private sectors. Now, the key is how we can share the risks between the private sector and the small island states. Thank you. A question from Mr. Laplage. On the guarantee schemes in France, we initiated in the 80s for the production of heat because the French territory is mainly producing heat. So we implemented an original scheme so that private operators can carry out drillings and get subsidies if it's a failure, if they cannot find the resources, and they are compensated at 90% of their expenses. It is what we call the geological risk versus other renewable energies such as solar energy or wind energy. So for geothermal energy, we have to make studies, as Alexandre explained. At some point, we have to confirm the assumptions by carrying out drillings. It is compulsory, and drillings are very, very expensive. A campaign or exploration drillings on an island can cost between 10 and 15 million euros. So today, the private operators don't want to take the risk to do these type of investments because the risk is not to find anything or to find a resource that cannot be valorized. So at the France, this scheme implemented in the 80s really made it possible to start geothermal energy. Paris area is showing the highest density of geothermal energy in the world. So we can work on a scheme of guarantee on the projects of electricity production, bearing in mind the volcanic island context. So we can have an Interreg project and we can implement a mechanism based on the experience we've had in France in this field of activity. And we have to mention that what was done in France was also exported to the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland. And this makes it possible to trigger really these type of operation. A question from Mr. Tappleton on these geothermal projects interconnected between the different states. What about this interconnection between the different states? What about the rules? And what about the states, the state aspect?
Yes, thank you for your question. My statement was basically a proposal for the interconnection, and I do agree to that. There has to be some level of regulation, and of course, the member states will have to collaborate with regard to the interconnection. But I think it's something that we can pursue in terms of taking advantage of the benefits of geothermal energy, because there are some islands with potential geothermal energy in excess of their domestic use. And so there are other areas that many of these countries are looking at, such as in green hydrogen, storage and other uses, and also to export energy to other islands. But yes, I agree with you that it would indeed take some level of regulation and cooperation among member states. Thank you.
Je vous remercie.
Merci à vous. Nous arrivons à la fin
Thank you.
Nous arrivons à la fin de cette première table ronde.
So this is the end of this first roundtable.
On va arrêter la traduction en direct, peut-être.
We will stop translation.
Merci. Nous arrivons maintenant sur cette.
So thank you.
Oui, mais dernière question, tout à fait.
The last question. Okay.
Question déjà pour Monsieur Verdol.
The interpreter did not hear the answer. It's a question from Mr. Verdol. What about the World Bank? Is it offering funds for feasibility studies? I think it did answer, but Mr. Verdol, a quick answer is yes. We have different sources of funds from analytic studies, technical systems, feasibility studies, and then the financing of exploration. And each time we have these needs for countries, for the World Bank, countries part of the OECS, apart from Martinique and Guadeloupe, we ask other countries to make grants to provide the finances, either with grants or institutions. Thank you. We have a lot of questions on the chat. I invite the panelists, the speakers, to answer directly. So a last question now. A last question now. It's a question for geothermal risk for volcanic energy is not covered as in France. BRGM, I think this question is for you. Are you connected, Mr. Stopin? Yes, here I am. I think Philippe did answer about the coverage, geological coverage in Guadeloupe. Philippe, could you answer the question? Yes, the risk today. We developed a scheme for geothermal energy in the metropole, which is different, looking for hot water very deep, like 1,800 meters deep, to feed heat networks. So it's a very different geothermal energy, very different from the volcanic environment where the fluid circulates between different cracks. So the risk is much bigger than in the metropole. When we do a drilling, you may do the drilling not at the right place. So we are thinking nowadays how we can implement on the French side aim to develop a similar mechanism to produce power and electricity that could be of interest for the French overseas territories. So we could implement the coverage of the risk for the exploration phase and then development phase. Each time we have a drilling, there is always a risk of failure. So the more you multiply the number of drilling, the risk is being reduced. So as I said before, the idea is to cover the project up to a certain amount, a certain percentage of cost, of expenses for the drillings, and then to trigger the intervention of the private operators. So when they have the guarantee, if there is a failure, they are covered, financially covered, like at 80 or 90% of the expenses. Necessarily, they will do it. They will go for it they will go for this type of operations. This happened 40 years ago in France, and it is still going on nowadays. So this scheme, we are going to try to implement it very quickly so that geothermal operations in Guadeloupe, Martinique, Réunion Island, to make them true in the next few years. And I think this mechanism is very, very necessary. This scheme will trigger the start of these operations.